Hi everyone, Quiveen here from the comfort of my kitchen. In today's video, we are going to look ahead into the month of March, at least to the early part of the month. We're also going to look back, or I suppose review, a couple of the things that are still coming up at the end of February. Hopefully by the time this video goes up, they will still be coming up and not already happened. So as we are now very close to the end of February and nearly into March, when the sun sets, we're really not going to see Saturn, at least not from here in Ireland. Jupiter is still up there, nice and high, and yep, this late, a couple of days into the future, the moon is going to be there pretty much at its fullest and pretty much at its furthest away. So this is something that we have already covered. I warned people that the micro moon will be coming up, and we can see it there, 99.8% full, over 400,000 kilometers away from us. We'll take a quick look at the moon here just so you can see that it does in fact look pretty much the same. The super moon won't be coming up until October, September or October, much later this year, but we will get to see the micro moon at the end of this month. So I've already mentioned it. There is a whole other video on this YouTube channel about the super moon and the micro moon, but just another warning now that we're a little bit closer to the actual micro moon, to the full moon, that is going to be coming up soon. Also coming up is Mars. Mars is going to get a lot more visible as we push into March. So we're still seeing Venus there in the morning by itself. Or at least that's how we're seeing it here in the city and here in Ireland. Some terrible foreshadowing on my part. But once we push a little bit later into March, we should start to see Mars a little bit in the morning. Maybe only if we take a closer look. Because Mars is still so close to the horizon here in Ireland when it's coming up, it's a pretty shallow angle stretching out from the sun. That means that we're going to be stuck with Mars trapped in this glow of sunrise as it's coming up in the morning. So I know that if Venus is there, Mars must be much higher in the sky by this point. There it is, way over there. So Mars is much further from the sun than Venus. If we imagine that the sun is down here, Venus is there, and Mars is out there. Of course, Mars is further from the sun than Venus. It's outside the orbit of the Earth, so it's further from the sun than we are. But its apparent position in the sky is also further out from the sun. But because the angle at which we're seeing the planets is so low here in Ireland, we're still not really going to see Mars. All of this glow of sunrise is going to be there, and Venus is bright enough to shine through it. Mars, not so much. Even if we start pulling back towards February, Mars will be quite close to Venus. It will end up getting closer as we get further back. There it is. So Mars and Venus, pretty close together in the sky there. But we're not actually going to see Mars, at least not from the city. This would be different in the countryside. Going to bring us all the way back into February, very late February in the next few days. There's Venus, nice and bright, visible through the glow of the sunrise. And there's Mars, right next to it. It is right there. And this is a great example of the difference in brightness between Venus and Mars, and why Venus was described as the morning star and the evening star. It hung around much longer. It was clearly the last thing visible in the morning or the evening sky. Even to the ancient Greeks and Romans, it was clear that Venus was the last thing there to come out, or last thing to disappear, first thing to come out. What I demonstrated in the previous video, in the Irish language video, is how location dependent this is. From way up here in Ireland, the equator is way down here. So we're seeing the ecliptic at a very shallow angle crossing our sky. That's one of the reasons the sun gets so low during the winter for us. If we hop all the way down here to the equator, we're going to see the planets, the sun, the moon, practically going right over our heads. Not exactly going right over our heads. I will at some point get to the highest noon when the sun is directly over your head. It happens in certain places at different times. But along the equator here, it's pretty close, especially as we come into March. And we can see that the equator here is pretty much marked by green. These lovely tropical rainforests are really what mark the equator here, the very middle of Africa there, around the Democratic Republic of Congo and areas like that. that is a rainforest. We can see it there at the top of Brazil. We can see it there, from Papua New Guinea up into Indonesia and those islands up here. That's really where the equator is. The deserts are either side of the equator, so we can see the kind of North American desert up there, the Sonora Desert, and we can see, well, it's hard to see, but down here there is a desert as well, the Atacama up in the mountains. All across there, of course, we've got the Sahara into the Arabian Peninsula, right through into the deserts up here, and down in Australia, down towards South Africa, we've got those very dry regions as well. So the equator is really marked by the rainforests, not by the deserts. Even though we think of deserts as being the hottest places and the equator being the hottest part of the planet, it gets a lot more complicated with that thanks to wind patterns and humidity. But here we are pretty much at the middle of the planet, around the equator, and we can already see that Venus is so much higher from the horizon than we were seeing it here in Ireland. As we push back towards sunrise, well, there's Mars. It's almost hard to see it with the labels on the planets, but if I remove them, there they are, a tiny little red dot next to that lovely kind of orangey, pinky, salmony coloured planet, the brightest. And if we take a closer look, well, it's fantastic. You can even see the colour difference. And this is something that will be achievable in a lot of telescopes. We can see here around the 23rd, they're pretty much at their closest, 22nd, 23rd, around that time. So this is a wonderful conjunction of these two planets. But it's going to be almost impossible for us to see it here in Ireland simply because of the angle at which we're seeing the ecliptic and the planets. Now, here's another great thing that we can see from the equator. It's a little bit easier from the equator than it is from higher locations like here in Ireland. But we can see the crescent moon. It almost looks like a smiley face or a pair of horns rising up out of the sky. So that is a wonderful place to look at the crescent moon. If you're close to the equator, it looks fantastic. And as we push forward to the equinox, which is coming up the 20th. It looks like I'm not on the equator, but that's okay. Once we come up to the 20th of March, we will be at the equinox. Maybe I am exactly at the equator. We can see that the sun is perfectly crossing east there. And this is something that we get at the equinoxes. The sun will cross the actual east point on the equinox. This doesn't happen on really any other date of the year. As we move through the year here, let's push past the equinox a little bit. We can see that the sun is setting and rising very much to the north of east. And if we were to push the other way, we'll go all the way back into January. I don't have the patience to go all the way back into January. Early February will do. We can see that there's the sun crossing the horizon, definitely to the south of east. So this is something that happens at the equinoxes. This is one way you can figure out the equinoxes. If you have a fence with a hole that is directly in the east, the sun will only shine through that hole exactly when it's crossing the horizon on the equinox. Of course, if the sun rises a little to the north of east, then as it rises into the sky, it will cross east, but that won't happen in the winter. That won't happen when the sun is rising to the south of east. So this is the equinox that is coming up on the 20th of March. We have the vernal equinox, the spring equinox, whatever you'd like to call it. It is right in between midsummer and midwinter. So we have that coming up. And if we pop back to Ireland, even though the sun will be rising at a much, much steeper angle, it stays at a quite steep angle even when we're at the equinoxes, simply because we're still so high up on the Earth. We can almost see it. I think this is, there's pros and cons to being close to the equator and far from the equator. Of course, we don't get to see the moon looking like a smiley face or horns. The planets are not as easily visible at sunrise, but we can see the glow of sunrise coming up there almost to the north of east. And then the sun finally crossing the horizon, just there, due east, and then continuing across the sky. So we can still see that it's happening at that angle, but it's crossing exactly where we'd expect it to in the east. And of course, the reverse happens in the evening, or I suppose the inverse rather than the reverse. But way over here, behind this tree nearly, we'll see the sun crossing the horizon. Well, I guess we won't get to because of the tree. The sun's there and it's moving at that angle, well, nearly that angle, just about there. So it should cross the horizon exactly in the west. Of course, we can cheat with Stellarium and get rid of the ground. And moving forward, there we are. I guess this is the evening of the equinox. If we were to go back a day, the sunset just before the equinox, I guess that's a little bit closer to due west for us. Yeah, there we go, exactly behind the W. So this is what happens during the equinoxes. The sun will rise exactly in the east, it will set exactly in the west, and we have that coming up in March. It's not the only thing that's coming up in March. Now that we are pretty late in March, I should be able to see Mercury in the evening. I'll bring back the names of the planets. That will help. So there's Jupiter. And just as the sun is going down, it might be a little earlier or a little later in March. There's Mercury. Mercury and Jupiter just above the sun. So we can see here as well, now that we're quite late in March, Jupiter's really close to the horizon. It's not going to be in the sky for very long, whereas for most of February, it was in the sky for practically half the night. That's going to change as we get through to the end of March. And for those of you living in other parts of the world, it appears that I do have viewers from places like America, well, from Canada and the United States. So we're going to get to see this. You're going to get to see this. You're also going to get to see a lunar eclipse. There is a lunar eclipse coming up in March on the 24th, which is the night of the full moon, or 25th, 24th, 25th, which is the night of the full moon for us here in Ireland as well. But we're not going to be in a good position to see the shadow of the Earth crossing onto the moon. Just as the moon is setting after being full. Is that exactly in the middle? Appears to be. We'll start to see a little bit of the Earth's shadow come onto the moon, or we should, but we're not going to get to see most of the what is a penumbral lunar eclipse. You will get to see it in other parts of the world. Just about caught it there before the moon disappeared. You will get to see this in other parts of the world, and I will cover that once we get a little bit later in March. So later in March, when we're closer to the lunar eclipse, this penumbral lunar eclipse, we'll travel using the wonders of technology to the Pacific coast of North America, around that, and we'll take a look at this penumbral lunar eclipse in a location when it will look good, or where it will look good. Now we can just about see there the shadow of the Earth moving onto the moon. You can see a slight difference between the lighter and the darker there. But it's tricky from here in Ireland. It will be a lot easier from the United States or Southern America as well. If you're in Chile or Argentina, it should look pretty good. But if you want an eclipse, of course, traveling to America is one option. Waiting until later in March when I bring out my video about that lunar eclipse, which will be pretty close to the end of March. So if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, you're more likely to be suggested the video that will show that. Or you can go back and take a look at my Irish language video. The last video on this channel dealt with the eclipse in Irish, but with English subtitles. So you can go back and take a look at that as well. If you enjoyed this look into March and the last couple of things in February, then make sure to like the video. As I mentioned, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you'd like to see more. And you can also take a look at queebeanscontent.ie to see some written information about these videos. So thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time.